On the SkyVista Airlines flight that morning, the first-class cabin was brightly lit and the sound of suitcases being dragged across the polished wooden floor. Two black twins, Ava and Maya Harrington, were sitting in rows 2B and 2C, carefully fastening their seatbelts, excited for the trip to Boston. But that joy was quickly stifled when a blonde woman in an expensive fur coat, Vanessa Albright, walked in and coldly ordered, "You two give up your seats. The airline's VIP is about to board." No one expected that. Just a few minutes later, the plane cabin would turn into a silent court in the sky where prejudice, power, and intelligence collided without a gunshot. A man sat in seat 2A, calmly observing, put down his newspaper, and with just one sentence, he brought the entire flight to a halt. It's not just about justice, it's about dignity, wisdom, and how a father teaches his son to stand up to injustice. If you believe that true justice does not need to be shouted, please share this video, and subscribe to the channel to join us on the journey of silent justice. The loudspeakers softly echoed in the SkyVista Airlines first-class cabin that morning, mingling with the sound of suitcase wheels rolling on the polished wooden floor. The soft light from the ceiling lights reflected on the freshly poured champagne glasses. The scent of expensive perfume, roasted coffee, and a sense of luxurious quiet permeated the small space, where only a few people were allowed to sit, but which carried with it invisible layers of social power. Two black twins, Ava and Maya Harrington, were sitting in rows 2B and 2C near the window. Their eyes were bright and full of excitement for their summer trip to Boston, where their grandmother, Evelyn Price, a former civil rights activist, was waiting. In front of them, on a small table, was a book called Hidden Figures, the story of the black women who helped NASA put a man on the moon. Ava was reading, while Maya was quietly writing a few lines in her notebook. Not far away, in seat 2A, Marcus Harrington, the father, was reading the newspaper. His eyes reflected the calmness of someone accustomed to facing injustice, not with anger, but with preparation. Marcus was a civil rights lawyer who had made corporations change their policies with reasonable questions, not threats. The door of the compartment opened for the last time. A group of 3 people entered, recognizable from the voices. The woman in the lead, Vanessa Albright, about 40, with tightly curled blonde hair and a white fur coat in midsummer. She was followed by her husband, Gregory Albright, his face smooth, his dark blue suit strained, and his daughter, Chloe, about 12, holding a phone to record a story. Vanessa entered as if the compartment belonged to her. Her eyes scanned the rows, then stopped at the twins. Her eyes narrowed and her lips lifted slightly, the smile of someone who believes that if she speaks, others will listen. "Excuse me," she said, louder than necessary. "You must have the wrong seats. These are for VIPs." The cabin fell silent. The chief stewardess, Paula Mitchell, looked slightly startled, then quickly approached with a forced smile. "Excuse me, Mrs. Albright, we're processing." Vanessa didn't let her finish her sentence. "I don't care who bought the tickets first. My husband is an investment partner of the airline. I believe the airline wants to treat VIPs properly." Marcus raised his head, looking over his shoulder at the newspaper. He said nothing. His daughters looked at him, questioning eyes. He nodded. It was a small nod, but it held the lesson he and his wife, Dr. Natalie Harrington, had promised each other: let your children pick themselves up before the world knocks them down. Ava took a deep breath and removed her headphones. Her voice was clear, but not shaky. "I'm sorry, but this is our chair. My dad bought it last week." Maya squeezed her hand and whispered, "We have our boarding passes here. You can see." Vanessa laughed, her laughter laced with contempt. "That's sweet, but sweetie, sometimes there are people more important You know, from across the row, there was the click of a phone. A middle-aged passenger, Edward Blake, was dialing. He whispered to the person next to him, "Here we go." Another class discrimination case. The atmosphere in the cabin changed, as tense as a string about to snap. Paula Mitchell, trying to maintain a service smile, bent down to the two girls' guys. "Can you help us move down to the economy cabin for a moment? The airline's VIP needs this space." Ava looked straight. "If the airline wants to, I think there should be a legitimate reason. My ticket doesn't say may be downgraded at the discretion of another person. Do you have any written permission for that?" A moment of silence. Someone coughed softly in the cabin. An elderly woman in seat 3A, Mrs. Lorraine Carter, spoke up. "She's right. First-class tickets aren't something we can just barter for. We all pay the same." Vanessa turned around. "You don't understand. We were invited by the company. And these two children." Her voice trailed off. Then she pursed her lips. Paula Mitchell tried to smile, but the embarrassment was clear on her face. She pulled out her phone and spoke softly to someone on the walkie-talkie. A minute later, she returned, her voice no longer soft. "If you two don't move, I'll have to call airport security to handle it." Ava stood up, not shying away. Maya remained seated, her hands shaking slightly, but her eyes wide open. Vanessa crossed her arms, a triumphant smile on her face. She spoke softly, but loud enough for the whole compartment to hear. "It's unbelievable. Even in first class, people don't know their place." The words fell, heavy as a stone. A moment later, as Paula was about to touch Ava's shoulder to help her move, a man's voice rang out, deep, clear, and cold. "Touch my daughter, and this will be the last flight you take." The entire compartment froze. All eyes turned to Marcus Harrington, who had just folded up the Atlantic and stood up. His gaze was not angry, but firm enough to stop people. Paula let go and took a step back. Vanessa forced a smile, trying to regain the initiative. "Oh, so you're the father of the two children, I see, but surely you don't want to cause trouble." Marcus looked at her calmly. "I don't need to cause trouble, ma'am. I just want to make sure the law is still in effect on this deck." No one said anything more. There was only the sound of the engines fading away. The plane was about to take off, but inside, the air felt frozen. In that silence, the phone continued to record. Neutral eyes gradually shifted to one side, to the two girls and their father who were standing. They didn't need to raise their voices, but the weight of their composure made the entire first-class cabin feel embarrassed. "Mrs." Carter nodded slightly to Marcus as a silent approval. Edward Blake pressed the dial again, whispering, This is what everyone needs to see." Marcus stood still, his eyes never leaving his daughter's. He knew the lesson would be seared into their minds, not just about discrimination, but about how one should respond when one's dignity is challenged. "Children," he said softly, "sit still. The truth does not need shouting." The first-class cabin had not yet taken off, but the air was already thick like a storm before an explosion. No one knew that in just a few minutes. A simple sentence from that man would change the entire SkyVista airline forever. Paula Mitchell, the chief flight attendant of SkyVista 207, was trying to keep her smile from stiffening. She looked around, feeling dozens of eyes on her. Some passengers had started filming. The air in the normally quiet first-class cabin was now so thick that you could hear them breathing. She still tried to complete the business. Paula stepped closer to Ava, trying to lower her voice to keep the situation from escalating. "Sweetie, I know you guys are just kids, but we have rules. If you move to economy, I will arrange for you to sit next to each other." Ava didn't answer. Maya looked down, her eyes brimming with tears. Paula held out her hand, a gesture that was probably meant to be instructive, but as her hand neared Ava's shoulder, that voice rang out, low, clear, and decisive, like a knife cutting through the air. "Touch my daughter. This will be the last flight you take." No one said anything more. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then the cabin froze. Marcus Harrington stood up. The leather chair 2A tilted slightly, and a copy of the Atlantic fell to the floor. He was not tall, but he had a presence that made people automatically move aside. His voice was not loud, but it carried clear enough for everyone to hear every word. Paula stopped, her hand still in mid-air. Her face flushed, then paled. Vanessa Albright raised her eyebrows, laughed a little, trying to look contemptuous. "Oh, you're threatening an airline employee. You know that's illegal." "Right." Marcus turned back, his eyes slowly turning towards her. Not angry, just cold. "No, ma'am. I'm just warning you about the consequences of physically violating a minor, especially when it happens while on duty. The law calls it assault." That made Vanessa lose her smile. Gregory Albright, her husband, who had been silent up until now, coughed slightly, about to interject, "Look, man, we're not supposed to be teaching law here." "We're just trying to help the firm get things in order," Marcus interrupted, his voice still low and calm. "So can you show me your ticket?" The question was like a silent slap. Gregory hesitated. Paula looked around, then tried to justify herself. They are on the company's priority list. I was just following the orders of the higher management." Marcus nodded slightly, as if he had heard this 100 times. "Miss Mitchell," he said, "I don't blame you. I just want you to remind the entire first-class cabin here. What law allows you to remove a child from a legally purchased seat just because someone more important wants to sit there?" The air was thick. No one spoke. The doors were still open. A few passengers began to mumble. Some stood up. Some took out their phones and started recording video as if they were witnessing something more than a fight. Mrs. Lorraine Carter, the woman in seat 3A, leaned forward and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "The girl is right. This man is right too. I have been flying for over 30 years, and I have never seen an airline treat a passenger like this." From the front, Edward Blake, who was in seat 1D, slowly put his glass of water down on the table, turned around, and said calmly, "Perhaps it is time for SkyVista to remind its staff that the law does not stop at the boarding gate." Paula Mitchell paled. Vanessa smiled wryly, clinging to what little power she had left. "Okay, maybe we should call the captain. I don't want to argue with someone who knows the rules like you." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Good idea." Less than a minute later, the cabin door opened. Captain Robert Hayes, the captain of the flight, walked in. He was in his 50s, stocky, with a quick eye for detail. He looked around and saw that everyone was gathered in one direction. "What's going on here?" he asked in a low voice. Paula hurried over and lowered her voice. Marcus didn't interrupt. He just sat back in his chair and put his hand on Maya's shoulder to calm her down. When Paula finished speaking, Captain Hayes looked at Marcus. "You were the passenger in seat 2A. Yes, I am Marcus Harrington, a civil rights lawyer. Those two girls are my children. I would like to ask, under SkyVista policy, can minors be legally removed from their seats just because someone more important asks?" The captain was silent for a few seconds. His eyes flicked to Vanessa, who was trying to smile. "I'm right. Mr. Albright. Mrs. Albright. May I see your tickets?" Gregory hesitated, then flipped open the phone and showed the screen. Captain Hayes glanced at it. A look of confusion crossed his face. "This ticket is economy class," he said slowly. Vanessa blushed. Yeah, but we got an upgrade. I'm friends with the CEO. Captain Hayes nodded, his voice still calm. No matter who your friend is, the upgrade process must have system confirmation. I don't see that here. A ripple of murmuring spread through the cabin. Edward Blake chuckled. Mrs. Carter closed her eyes and said softly, Justice is speaking. Vanessa started to lose her cool. You don't understand. I'm going to call Stephen Whitaker right now. Captain Hayes interrupted. You can call whoever you want, but this flight is my responsibility, and I will not allow anyone, even a VIP, to pressure minors or fully paid passengers. Then he turned to Paula Miss Mitchell. You asked a passenger to leave his seat without valid grounds. Paula bowed her head and said in a small voice, Yes, I was just following the instructions of the executive office. Which office? Paula was silent. Captain Hayes nodded, his eyes heavy. You are temporarily suspended from this flight. I will assign someone else to take your place. The atmosphere changed instantly. Vanessa stepped back, her face pale. Gregory tugged at his wife's hand, trying to save face. But it was too late. All eyes in the cabin who had been silent were now on Marcus and the girls. Marcus only nodded his thanks to the captain. He did not smile, nor did he gloat. There was only silence in his eyes, the silence of someone accustomed to justice being slow to come, but always coming. Ava looked at her father, her voice small but firm. Dad, are we in trouble? Marcus smiled. No, honey. We just taught them a lesson about boundaries. The cabin door closed. The engine noise grew louder. The plane began to taxi down the runway, but the atmosphere inside was different. No more contempt, no more fake laughter, just silence, the heavy silence of people who have just realized they have been wrong. And in the silence, Marcus's voice rang out again, soft enough for the two children to hear. Justice does not need to be rushed. It just needs to stand. Ava squeezed Maya's hand. Maya smiled, for the first time all morning, but the storm wasn't over yet. As the flight hit the clouds, a short video capturing the entire scene began circulating online. And this time, justice wasn't just in SkyVista's first-class cabin, it was spreading across the skies of America. In first class, as the plane leveled out, everything seemed to quiet down. The engine hummed steadily, and a soft yellow light bathed the faces of the three Harringtons. But behind the silence were countless thoughts intertwined, small, quiet, yet profound questions. Ava was still looking out the window, her bright eyes reflecting the vast sky. She had a stubborn energy, as if the world, no matter how big, had to listen to her voice. Maya, on the other hand, was writing something in a small notebook. The lines were neat. When people say you are not worthy, that is when you must remember who taught you your worth. Marcus looked at his daughters, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. In that moment, he remembered the words of his wife, Natalie, who always said, you can't teach your daughters to avoid injustice, but you can teach them to stand firm in it. Ava suddenly turned to her father. Dad, why do people think they have more rights than others just because they are rich? Marcus did not answer at once. He slowly folded the newspaper and set it on the table. You know, he said, his voice low, there are two kinds of power in this world. One is the power a man gives himself. The other is the power that others respect because he deserves it. The man with the first kind is always afraid of losing it. Maya looked up, her eyes seeming to consider each word. Like Grandma Evelyn said, right, that wars don't need guns, they just need people to stand still. Marcus nodded slightly. Yes, that's what they always say. You know, I was turned away from a rental property because of the color of my skin. But instead of suing, I bought the building and rented it out cheaply to people like me who had been turned away." Both girls burst out laughing, innocent laughter that drifted through the clouds. Easing the tense atmosphere, Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. He remembered the morning before he left home. Natalie, in her white blouse, stood at the door, saying over and over again, "I promised to let the kids figure things out for themselves before I intervened. Remember, I always wanted to protect them, but sometimes they need to learn to protect themselves." He nodded. And this morning, he kept his word. He let Ava and Maya face the prejudice in their own voices before he had to step in. Now, watching them sit calmly beside him, he knew the first lesson had been learned. The purpose of their trip was nothing special. The two girls flew to Boston to spend 6 weeks of the summer with Natalie's mother, Evelyn Price, a local civil rights leader who taught Natalie not to teach your children to be good, but to be kind. Ava and Maya were always excited to talk about their grandmother. At her house, the girls learned to grow vegetables, cook, and read old books about the time when black people were segregated on buses. This time, she also arranged for them to participate in a special summer program, Voices of Tomorrow, where children were taught to speak up, politely but firmly, not with anger, but with reason. A moment later, the new flight attendant, who had been assigned by the captain to replace Paula, walked over and gently placed 2 glasses of orange juice on the table. She bowed her head, "Mr. Harrington, on behalf of the airline. I apologize for the incident earlier. The captain will send you a report and refund information when we land." Marcus smiled politely. "Thank you. I just hope that today's lesson will be remembered by someone longer than the ticket price." The flight attendant was a little surprised, then nodded, her eyes filled with respect, a feeling rarely seen in first class, where people are used to bowing their heads because of title, not personality. As she left, Maya raised her head. "Dad, does Evelyn know about this?" "Maybe," Marcus replied, smiling. "She has friends everywhere, and she has a habit of watching the news every morning before making tea." Ava giggled. "You'll definitely call Mom." Marcus looked at his watch. "Your grandmother is probably sitting on the porch, reading the news on her old iPad. She'll probably be smiling, half proud, half reminding me." It's just the beginning. Marcus. In the first-class cabin, everyone calmed down. The captain returned to the cockpit, and other passengers spoke quietly about that calm black lawyer. On social media, a short 2-minute, 17-second video was going viral, titled "Lawyer Calmly Shuts Down Racial Bias Mid-Flight." In the cabin, the 3 of them remained silent. Ava leaned her head on her father's shoulder and said softly, "Dad, when you said that, the whole cabin was frozen in silence." Marcus gently stroked his daughter's hair. "Sometimes you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to make them listen to themselves." Maya nodded, whispering as if to herself. Like Evelyn, a slight shudder tilted the plane. Through the window, sunlight fell on 3 faces, 3 different generations on a single journey fighting for dignity, with intelligence, with deliberate silence. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the sound of the engines mingle with his thoughts. He knew that when the plane landed, what had happened today would not be just a matter between the 3 of them. It would be the beginning of a series of changes, not loud, not dramatic, but as enduring as true justice. But for Marcus, justice was never just a first-class affair. It began with family dinners, with Evelyn's teachings, and with the lessons he passed on to his 2 daughters, how to stand with your mind, even when the world tries to bring you to your knees. Before leaving home that morning, Marcus Harrington paused for a long time at the door. His wife, Natalie, was in front of the mirror, tying her hair The morning sun streamed through the glass windows, reflecting off her white blouse, illuminating the small kitchen like the calm before the storm. "Remember what you promised," Natalie said, without turning around. "Let the kids talk. Let them learn to stand up for themselves, even if you're sitting right there." Marcus stood still, his hands on her shoulders. "I remember. But you know, I've never been good at watching someone touch my child." Natalie turned back, looking deep into her husband's eyes. "I'm not asking you to stand by and watch. I'm asking you to wait. Wait until the children find their voice. Because if you speak first, the world will hear the voice of a black man protesting. But if they speak, the world will hear the voice of justice growing." The words were seared into Marcus's mind, and as the plane took off this morning, he could still hear them echoing in his head, low, clear, like the soundtrack to reason. Now, against the hazy blue sky outside the window. Marcus looked back at that moment when Ava stood up, eyes blazing, saying, "I'm sorry, but this is my chair." It wasn't just a reaction, but the result of years of being taught that dignity never required asking for permission. He recalled that a few months ago, on a rainy evening. Ava had asked Dad, "Why are you always so calm when they said those hurtful things? Why didn't you react?" Marcus smiled then and replied, "Because anger is what they expect from us, but when we don't do what they expect, we make them face themselves." Ava nodded, but Maya, the calmer sister, asked, "But what if they don't change?" Marcus looked at both children and said softly, "When you keep your dignity, you don't just change them, you keep yourself. And that is true victory." Back in first class, when the dust had settled, Marcus realized he had just walked a thin line between his protective fatherly instincts and his teacherly role, teaching his daughter to stand up for herself. The moment Paula tried to touch Ava, he felt his heart clench. For just a split second, he wanted to reach out and cover her, to pull her out of harm's way. But at the same time, the memory of his promise to Natalie surfaced. He knew this was the moment his daughter learned her first lesson in using her intelligence instead of her reaction. And then he saw it. They did it. Ava stood tall, speaking politely but firmly. Maya kept her composure, handing out the ticket with steady hands. They were both small in the gleaming first-class cabin, but to him they were bigger than anyone else there. Marcus sighed and leaned his head back in his chair. The waitress had just passed by and placed a cup of black coffee on his table. He looked at the steaming cup and smiled a smile that was both proud and bitter. He remembered when he was Ava's age, when his father, a carpenter in Georgia, was refused service in a roadside restaurant because he was black. Marcus, then 12, stood up and argued. His father put his hand on his shoulder, pulled him back down, and simply said, "You don't need to argue with people who don't want to understand. You just need to live so that they see they are wrong." He didn't fully understand it until he became a father. Now, looking at Ava and Maya, he knew his father. Natalie and Evelyn were all saying the same thing. Don't let the world teach you to be angry. Teach you to win with reason. Ava looked up at her father, her voice still heavy with emotion. "Dad, what if I don't say anything? What if I stay silent?" Marcus chuckled. "You weren't silent, Ava. But even if you chose to be silent, the important thing is that you chose to be silent because you wanted to, not because they scared you," Maya interjected. More gently, "Dad, I was scared. I just thought if I cried or got angry, they would laugh." Marcus looked at his son, his eyes warming. "You were right. Fear is a human emotion, but controlling it, That is the mark of a strong man. The first-class cabin remained silent. Vanessa Albright sat in the distance, her face turned away from everyone else. Gregory pretended to read a magazine, but his hands were shaking. No one spoke, but everyone understood the hierarchy of power in the cabin had just been overturned not by a scream, but by the calm voices of two little black girls. Marcus turned to the window. White clouds drifted by, light as memories. He thought of Natalie. Perhaps she was in the hospital now, in the middle of her shift, still unaware of what had happened on the flight. He imagined her watching the viral video, the scene where Ava confronted Vanessa, her voice low but clear, and then he stood up and said just one sentence that silenced the cabin. Natalie would probably smile, worried and proud. And Evelyn, she would probably just sigh and say, "That's the price, Harrington blood. Silence makes the whole world hear." A few passengers walked by quietly, placing their hands on Marcus's shoulders as they headed toward the restroom. One man said quietly, "You did the right thing. Not because you're a lawyer, but because you're a father." Marcus nodded and replied, "Thank you. But really, I was just keeping my promise to my wife." As the plane continued its journey, the light outside softened. Maya dozed on Ava's shoulder, and Ava leaned against her father, her eyes half closed. Marcus sat still, his hands still on their shoulders, his gaze no longer directed toward the sky, but into the silence between the three of them. There, he saw what he had always believed: justice is not a victory of the strong, but a lesson passed from generation to generation, a lesson in standing up without hurting anyone. As the sunset began to filter through the window, a soft ding sounded, the signal that the captain was about to make an announcement. Marcus opened his eyes, and before he could guess what was going on, the voice of Paula Mitchell, the flight attendant who had just been suspended, suddenly rang out from the back of the cabin, and the second wave of the SkyVista flight began. Paula stepped out of the middle cabin, her uniform still in place, a service smile on her face as if the incident this morning had never happened. But her eyes were no longer those of a waitress, but of someone trying to regain control. Her voice rang out, soft and cold. "Sorry. There is a slight problem with the seating system. I need to reconfirm the tickets for the two children in seats 2B and 2C. The first-class cabin was silent. Marcus said nothing. He put down his magazine and looked at his daughters. He knew what was happening, and he knew this was their next lesson. Ava looked at Maya, then nodded slightly. She opened the desk drawer, took out the printed plane ticket, and held it out. Her voice was polite, but not shaky. "Yes, here are my sister's tickets. My mother bought them last week. The reservation code is SV2007, first class, rows 2B, 2C. Paula leaned over and took the tickets without looking down. She kept her smile as thin as a thread, her lips trembling slightly. "Thank you, sweetie. But there must have been a mistake. We have VIP passengers today, the Albrights. They need these two seats together. Could you please move them to economy? We can rearrange them to make it more convenient." Maya swallowed. She turned to Ava, looking for approval. Then, in a small but firm voice, she said, "We're sorry, ma'am, but this is our seat. I don't think the airline can take it back just because someone more important wants it." Paula tilted her head and chuckled, as if talking to two children who didn't know what to do. "I understand, but sometimes there are special customers. You just need a little help. I promise I'll make it up to you with a free meal in economy." Marcus remained silent. He watched, his eyes firm but soft. Natalie's words echoed in his head. "Let her go first, then you." The cabin began to murmur. A few passengers realized what was going on. Vanessa Albright, from the back row, chuckled, "Oh, Paula, go ahead. I think you know who should sit there." Her voice was sweet, but the emphasis on the word "who" was enough to make the atmosphere in the cabin heavy. Ava turned her head, her eyes clear, but containing a gentle challenge. "I think if someone is truly a VIP, they wouldn't need to take someone else's seat." The cabin fell silent. A few people chuckled, not mockingly, but admiringly. Paula Mitchell blushed slightly. Vanessa leaned into the aisle, her voice raised. "This girl is so rude, Paula. Are you going to let two kids teach you how to work?" Paula turned, trying to keep her composure. But the pressure from behind her, from Vanessa, from the stares of the passengers, from the glowing camera phones, made her tense. She took a deep breath and said in a harsh voice, "Kids, I told you, this is the airline's decision. If you don't cooperate, I will call security when we land." Ava leaned forward and placed the ticket back on the table. Her voice was soft but firm. "I don't believe this is the airline's decision. Paula, if it was, they would have made it clear in writing or in a notice. If not, I think you're overstepping your authority." Paula's eyes widened. "What did she say?" I said. "You are behaving as if power is your personal toy." A wave of silence fell over the cabin. Everything stopped. Even the engine sounded slower. Marcus Harrington tilted his head, a barely perceptible smile on his face. He knew he had no need to intervene. His daughters had done what he and Natalie had wanted them to do, confront injustice with intelligence, not with screams. From the front row, Edward Blake, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, called back softly, "Miss Mitchell, I heard you clearly. You two are right. I have worked in aviation law for 30 years. You cannot force a passenger to leave his seat just because a VIP wants to sit. That is a breach of the contract of carriage." Paula was startled and took a half-step back. Vanessa was annoyed. "Who are you to interfere?" Edward replied evenly. As a man who has seen enough of this sort of thing, no one said anything more. The atmosphere in the cabin was like a lake in a gust of wind. All eyes were on Paula. She took a deep breath, then forced a smile. "Okay, I'm just doing my duty. But you're making things harder than they need to be." Maya turned to her sister and said softly, "Sister, I'm afraid she'll call the police." Ava took her hand. "If they come, we're still right, and Dad's right here." Marcus nodded, saying nothing. He knew that this was where his children were learning the most important lesson of their lives, the lesson of the line between politeness and weakness, between respect and self-abasement. A moment later, Captain Robert Hayes stepped out of the cockpit. He looked around, taking in the situation in seconds. "What's going on?" His voice was calm but firm. Paula began to explain, emphasizing the VIP airline part. But when the captain asked for the Albrights' tickets, Vanessa could only smile wryly. "We have a private arrangement with CEO Stephen Whitaker." Captain Hayes looked straight at Marcus. "Mr. Harrington, I've looked at the records. Your son's tickets are valid. No one has the authority to ask them to vacate their seats." Then he turned to Paula, his voice low but each word echoing off the wall. "Miss Mitchell, you are suspended from duty on this flight. Please return to mid-deck." Paula paled. Vanessa was about to protest, but the captain raised his hand, his eyes firm and "Mrs. Albright, if you continue to make disruptive comments, I will request security to escort you off the plane when we land." The cabin was dead silent. Ava squeezed her hand. Maya smiled softly. Marcus let out a small sigh, relieved. In the pale golden light of the sunset, the three of them sat silently. No further explanation was needed. The truth spoke loud enough. Marcus knew that in this moment, His two girls had crossed a threshold, the line between children and adults who knew their worth. But it doesn't stop there, because as soon as the plane landed in Boston, what happened in the SkyVista first-class cabin was witnessed by millions of people. And from there, justice began to find its own path. The day before the video went viral, on the morning of departure from Los Angeles, SkyVista's first-class cabin was quiet. Light streamed through the glass windows, reflecting off the rows of dark brown leather seats where the world's busiest people often spend a few hours forgetting themselves. Marcus Harrington put his small suitcase on the shelf and sat down in seat 2A. Beside him, his twin daughters, Ava and Maya, had packed their things neatly, and a copy of Hidden Figures was already on the table. Both girls were excited for the trip to Boston, where their grandmother, Evelyn Price, was waiting. Everything was going normally, until the compartment door opened, and the Albright family walked in. Three figures: Gregory Albright, a middle-aged businessman in a dark blue suit; Vanessa, a blonde woman in a white dress, walking as if the floor were a red carpet; and her daughter Chloe, about 12 years old, holding a phone to record a story. They entered first class not by presence, but by voice. Vanessa glanced from seat to seat, her lips curling slightly. "I don't see our row. Paula, please check. We're supposed to sit here, right?" Paula Mitchell, the chief flight attendant, hesitated. "Ma'am, your ticket is currently economy, but Vanessa interrupted economy." There must be a mistake. I called Stephen Whitaker, the CEO of the airline. He made it clear that we would be upgraded. First class, 3 seats together. The compartment was silent. Marcus kept flipping through the paper, his eyes lingering on the words without really reading them. He had seen enough of them people who carried their privilege without realizing its weight. Paula glanced at the list, then smiled wryly. "Yes, rows 2B and 2C are now occupied. 2 little black girls, Ava and Maya Harrington." Vanessa turned around and looked straight at the 2 girls. Her eyes flashed with annoyance, then turned into a smile, the kind of smile of someone about to give an order. "Oh, how cute. But there must be some mistake. You two, can you move downstairs? Mom and Dad need to sit together." Ava looked at Maya, then at her father. Marcus just nodded a calm nod, as if to say, "I'll handle it." Ava stood up, her voice small but clear. "Miss, this is my brother and I's chair. My mother bought it last week." Maya added politely, "We have boarding passes, if you want to see them." Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her eyes skimming over the 2 tickets as if they were mere scraps of paper. "Sweetie, I'm sure the company can just rearrange things. There are people who need priority. You know my family is a regular guest of the CEO." Ava pursed her lips, her eyes unwavering. "I don't know who the CEO is, but I know the airline's rules the purchased seat belongs to the passenger." That statement made a few passengers nearby look over. A phone rang. Someone started recording a video. Vanessa rolled her eyes and sneered. "My goodness, children these days are really taught terribly." Her husband, Gregory, interjected, his voice lower but no less arrogant. "Honey, don't make a big deal out of it. I'm sure the airline will take care of it. Just let the flight attendant handle it." Then he turned to Paula, his voice commanding. "Miss Mitchell, get it together. I don't have time for this little trouble." Paula bowed her head slightly, trying to smile her usual service smile, but her hands were shaking slightly. "I understand, sir. Let me handle it right away." She turned back to Ava and Maya. "Bowed you two? I'm sorry, but these 2 seats need to be changed. The airline will arrange other seats for you two in economy class, still sitting next to each other." Maya looked at her, her voice low, but we did nothing wrong. The simple statement fell on deaf ears. Paula paused. Vanessa sighed and tossed her hair. Sweetheart, it's not about right or wrong. It's just order. There are people who need this place more than you two. Ava turned her head, her voice surprisingly calm. I think real order is when everyone is treated the same. The statement made a few people behind him gasp. An elderly man in row 3A, Mr. Edward Blake, nodded and said softly, "The girl is right." Vanessa glanced quickly, annoyed. I don't have time to argue about social philosophy on an airplane. Then she clapped her hands twice, turned to Paula. "Call the manager out here." Paula looked around, clearly torn between duty and shame. She opened her mouth, but at that moment, Marcus folded the newspaper and looked up. No one in the cabin knew who he was, but the way he stood up, slowly, calmly, without a single wasted movement, made everyone fall silent. Ava and Maya looked at their father, unafraid, waiting. Marcus took a step forward, his voice deep and clear. "Ms. Mitchell, I trust you do not wish to violate flight safety regulations by attempting to remove a minor from a purchased seat." "Do you?" Paula stammered. I was just following orders from the manager." Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good. When you receive an illegal request, you have the right to refuse. If you continue, I have the right to consider it coercive. And if you touch my child—" He stopped, his gaze freezing the air around him. "This will be the last flight you take." The first-class cabin fell silent. Vanessa opened her mouth, but her voice died when Marcus's eyes swept over her, not angry, just unnervingly quiet. Ava and Maya sat still, their eyes on their father, and it was clear from their gazes they didn't need anyone screaming to protect them. Just a father strong enough to remind the world that justice doesn't need to scream, it just needs to stand still. When Captain Robert Hayes appeared to handle the incident, no one knew that the moment would become the focal point for a wave of awakening across America, where two black girls taught the world a lesson in self-respect. Captain Robert Hayes appeared in the middle of the first-class cabin, dressed in a dark blue uniform, his eyes stern. Without raising his voice, his presence silenced everyone. He scanned the room, then stopped at the twin girls, Ava and Maya Harrington. "What's going on here?" His voice was low, even, but weighty. Paula Mitchell, still not recovered from Marcus's warning, hurriedly stepped forward and said quickly, "Captain, this is just a small misunderstanding. The Albright family are VIP guests of the airline. They need seats, and the two children has a valid ticket and is sitting in the correct seat as stated on the boarding pass." Marcus cut her off in a calm voice. Not loud, but loud enough for everyone to hear. The captain nodded slightly, confirming with his eyes. "Yes, I can see that information clearly on the passenger board." He turned to Paula. "Ms. Mitchell, do you have any evidence that the airline asked these two passengers to change seats?" Paula faltered. Looking for help from behind? Vanessa Albright began to lose patience, interjecting in a tone of one accustomed to being served. "Captain, I know Stephen Whitaker, CEO of SkyVista. We were promised an upgrade. I didn't expect to be in situations like this. This is the situation." Those 3 words cut through the air like a knife. Everyone knew what she was referring to, but no one said anything. Until Mrs. Lorraine Carter, sitting in row 3A, gently put down her magazine. She was in her 60s, with neatly cropped silver hair and reading glasses. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were as sharp as steel. "Excuse me, what do you mean by a situation like this?" Vanessa flinched slightly, then tried to smile. "I just wanted to say it's not a big deal. I didn't mean anything else." "Oh, I think everyone knows what you mean," Lorraine replied, her voice low, but short and to the point. I've been flying this route for 10 years, and I've never had anyone turn two kids away because they were different skin colors." Paula Mitchell paled. Vanessa paused, her eyes glancing around. Another male voice spoke up. "Edward Blake, passenger in seat 1D. The gray-haired man who had spoken earlier, he rested his arms on his seat and spoke slowly. "I work in aviation law, and I can confirm it is against the rules to ask a passenger to vacate his seat to make way for a VIP. Captain Hayes. I believe you know that better than anyone." Hayes nodded. "I know, and thanks for reminding me." The cabin fell silent again, but it was no longer a silence of fear, but of shifting awareness. Gregory Albright, the man who had been sitting silently all this time, finally spoke up. "Come on," he said, trying to be polite. "You're making a big deal out of it. We just want to sit together. No need to make it into a social symbol." Lorraine Carter turned back and looked at him with a penetrating gaze. "Sir, small matters are no longer small matters when people use money and influence to erase justice. You may think these are just two children, but it is through such small matters that the world goes wrong little by little." Gregory chuckled, trying to contain his irritation. "Are you lecturing me?" "No," Lorraine replied, her eyes never leaving him. "I'm reminding you that someone is watching, and maybe this time they won't look away." The air in the cabin was thick. Ava and Maya sat still, their hands clasped together. They didn't understand everything that was being said, but they could sense something shifting, the power shifting from prejudice to justice, from silence to voice. Gregory Albright suddenly blurted out, his voice harsh. "You people always make things complicated." The first three words, "you people," dropped like a heavy stone in the cabin. The air shattered. A passenger behind him sucked in a sharp breath. Lorraine Carter put the magazine down on the table, straightened her back, and looked straight at Gregory. "You people," she emphasized each word slowly. "I've lived long enough to know that when someone says that, what they really mean is, people like you don't belong here." No one said anything. Marcus just looked at Gregory silently. No anger, no reaction. Just a look that made the other person lower his head. Edward Blake spoke, more forcefully this time. "Mr. Albright, I advise you to apologize. Not only for the two girls who heard you, but for us too, who have been tired of hearing it for the past 40 years. Gregory turned away, his face red. Vanessa gently tugged on his arm and whispered, "Greg, stop." But it was too late. A young man in the last row raised his phone, filming the whole scene. Captain Hayes looked around, his voice clear and decisive. "On this flight, all passengers are treated equally. Any offensive behavior, whether verbal or physical, is unacceptable. I ask everyone to remain silent and respectful of each other." His voice rang out like an anchor holding the tottering ship of morality. Paula Mitchell bowed her head and stepped back into the middle cabin. Vanessa Albright turned to the window and said nothing more. Gregory hung his head, his eyes averted. Meanwhile, Lorraine Carter turned to Ava and Maya and smiled warmly. "You did well. You don't have to say it loudly, just say it right. And that's enough to make people listen." Ava bowed her head, her voice soft. "I didn't know what to say when they said that. I just remember Dad saying, 'If you keep quiet, you'll lose your voice.'" Lorraine nodded, her hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "And today, you kept it." Marcus watched, his heart stilling. He knew this moment would last longer than a flight. It would be a lesson told, not with anger, but with wisdom, the most enduring justice humans could create. The cabin quieted. Some passengers bowed their heads to read. Others nodded at Marcus, brief glances of recognition. Justice has been served, not by court order, but by voices brave enough to stand up when needed. But prejudices are not easily dissolved by a few words. When Paula Mitchell returns with a colder face than before, and Captain Hayes faces pressure from above, Marcus knows that the real battle is just beginning. The first-class cabin, which had been calm, was now stormy again. Paula Mitchell returned from the middle cabin, her professional smile gone. The light reflecting off her name tag made her cheeks tense even more. She looked at no one but the twins. "Children," she said, her voice low, trying to be polite but forcing the words through her teeth. "I'm going to say this one last time. If you don't leave your seats, I'll call security as soon as we land. I don't want to do it, but you're getting in the way of my job." Ava looked up. She looked straight into the flight attendant's eyes, her voice small but clear. "Are you threatening us?" Paula stiffened. "I just work." "But you're wrong," Ava replied, "and you know it." The words were so soft, but in that dense space, they rang like a bell. A few passengers stirred slightly, their phones raised again. Maya, sitting next to her, gently squeezed her sister's hand, a sign of fear, but she still tried to raise her head. "We didn't do anything wrong, Ms. Paula. And you shouldn't touch other people like that." Paula rolled her eyes, her expression turning from tense to cold. "You don't need a child to teach you how to do your job." Then she reached out, so quickly that most passengers only saw the pale blue sleeve of her SkyVista uniform sweep past. Her hand grabbed Ava's wrist, tugging at the small suitcase under the seat. The wheels of the suitcase hit the floor with a soft thud. Ava swayed, but kept her balance. Maya burst into tears. A small sob echoed through the cabin, breaking through the fragile silence like a knife. Marcus stood, not fast, not slow, just enough so that his movements froze the cabin. "Get your hands off me." His voice was low, not louder than the engine, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Paula paused, as if waking from a power stupor. She let go of Ava's wrist, took a half step back, and looked around. Marcus approached, his gaze moving over Paula like a thin blade, fireless but heavy. "Miss Mitchell, you have just violated federal aviation safety laws. Forcing a minor, touching a body without consent, you understand that can constitute assault, right?" Paula opened her mouth, but couldn't say anything. He continued, "And if you threaten to call security, make sure they know who should be escorted down." Ava stood still, her wrists red. Maya was still crying, but she was trying to hold back her sobs. Marcus bent down and gently touched his daughter's shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly, just enough for the two girls to hear. "You did the right thing. Now it's my turn." He stood up and turned to Captain Hayes, who had left the cockpit when he heard the commotion. "Captain, you are the person in charge of this flight. I am asking you to immediately take note of the incident, coercive and threatening behavior towards a minor by one of our flight attendants." Hayes nodded, his expression heavy. He said nothing, just pulled out his walkie-talkie and signaled for the clerk to take notes. Paula took another step back, her face pale. She looked around, hoping someone would speak up for her. But this time, no one came. A woman's voice rang out from row 3A, Mrs. Lorraine Carter. She was holding the child's hand. "I saw it. There's no excuse for that." Another, Edward Blake. Deep, clear voice. "I recorded the whole thing. The video will be sent to the Civil Aviation Authority." Paula spun around, her face white. Vanessa Albright tried to intervene, but Gregory held her hand. "Shut up, Vanessa," he whispered. "That's enough." But it was Vanessa who couldn't bear the silence. She burst out in a shrill voice. "What the hell is this? Is the whole cabin filming? Have you forgotten who the VIPs are here?" Marcus turned to look at her. Just one look, Not angry, not contempt, just a strange calm. There are no VIPs on this flight, ma'am, just passengers and the law. A flight attendant stepped forward, her voice trembling. Captain, should we perhaps ask Miss Mitchell to move back to the middle cabin? Hayes nodded. Yes. Paula wanted to protest, but her lips trembled. Only a sharp gasp escaped. She stepped back, her shoes clicking rapidly on the floor as if running away from her own actions. Ava watched, her eyes not hateful, only sad. She bent down, adjusting the strap of her luggage. Maya wiped away her tears, but her small hand still held her sister's tightly. Lorraine Carter leaned over and said softly, "Are you guys okay?" Ava nodded, her voice soft. "Yes, I'm fine." "No," Marcus replied, his gaze still on Paula disappearing. "But we will be fine, because justice begins with not being silent in the face of wrong." Captain Hayes turned and looked at him. "Mr. Harrington, I apologize on behalf of the airline. When we land, I will take a full report. Miss Mitchell will be suspended from duty until the investigation is complete." Marcus nodded, relieved but unhappy. "Thank you." "I'm not looking for an apology. I'm looking for change," Hayes replied. "Perhaps today?" "You just started one." The flight continued, but no one could talk normally anymore. Sunlight slanted through the window, illuminating Ava's hand, which still bore a faint red mark. Marcus looked at his daughter, a sad smile on his face. "Does it hurt?" Ava shook her head. "No, Dad. It just feels strange." "How strange? I don't think she's afraid of me after doing that." Marcus chuckled. "People are most afraid when they see they are wrong and don't have the courage to admit it." Maya leaned against her father's shoulder, her voice trembling slightly. "Dad, will she lose her job?" "Maybe, but that's not as important as what she learns from today." The whole compartment was silent. A man behind him said softly, "He's right." And from there came a few murmurs of agreement, small but real. Justice, sometimes, begins with just a small string of sounds like that. As the plane was about to land, Marcus thought everything was over. But what he didn't know was that what was about to happen on the ground would change the airline forever, starting with the confession of a captain named Robert Hayes. But then a message from the cockpit changed Captain Hayes's face. He received an internal call from SkyVista's operations center, where a senior manager had asked him to maintain order and prioritize VIP Albright until landing. Hayes looked at Marcus, then at the twins, and he knew he was being pulled between justice and convenience. Paula Mitchell, though relieved of duty, returned to the front cabin in a submissive manner. She took a deep breath, her voice strained. "Mr. Harrington, I have just received instructions. The Albrights may be reassigned, and I have been asked to request that you two be temporarily moved down, pending confirmation from the airline." The air in the cabin suddenly thickened. Marcus raised his head slowly. His gaze wasn't angry, it was heavy, as if he'd heard the same words all his life. "You mean instructions from the company?" He emphasized each word. "Yes, sir." "Thank you." "Then, may I ask, under what provision of U.S. aviation law did you authorize the order to force two minor passengers to vacate their legally purchased seats?" Paula paused. I was just following orders." Marcus took a step forward. His voice was low, but it carried like a miniature courtroom. "Miss Mitchell, following orders does not excuse liability. If you use your professional authority to threaten or touch a minor without consent, that conduct constitutes coercion and assault under federal law. 49 U.S.C. Parv A 46504. The cabin was silent. Only the distant hum of the engine could be heard. "Assault is not just a physical attack," he continued, his eyes never leaving Paula, "but any act that puts another person in fear for their safety. And when the victim is a child, the law considers that an aggravating circumstance." Paula turned pale. Vanessa Albright, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly interrupted. "Come on. Why are you so serious? She's just doing her job." Marcus turned. "Work her job is to ensure passenger safety, not to use power to overshadow justice. And you, Mrs. Albright," he paused, his gaze cold as steel, "you repeatedly demanded priority treatment because you considered yourself a VIP. But according to Federal Aviation Administration regulations, there is no provision for racial preference on any SkyVista ticket." A small round of applause broke out behind him. Mrs. Lorraine Carter, the silver-haired woman in seat 3A, nodded slightly, her eyes lighting up. Edward Blake raised his phone and said loudly, "I'm taking notes, and I can confirm that Mr. Harrington said every word correctly." Gregory Albright gritted his teeth. "Who do you think you are, lecturing others here?" Marcus turned, his eyes soft but firm. "I am Marcus Harrington, civil rights attorney for the state of California. And most of all, I am the father of 2 children who were recently humiliated simply because of the color of their skin." A ripple of excitement spread through the cabin. Other phones started shooting up, recording the scene. Vanessa blinked, unconvinced. Gregory stiffened. Marcus remained upright, his hands resting lightly on the back of the chair in front of him, a stance that was both calm and commanding. "In my 30 years of practice, I have seen too many people treated as second-class citizens, simply because they were born different. But today, I do not intend to wait another minute to reiterate the basics. The law does not serve those who have money. It protects those who have the right to be respected." He paused, looking at Captain Hayes, who stood silently at the cabin door. "Mr. Hayes, I believe you understand better than anyone that this flight is not about the destination, but about how we choose to land, with honor or in disgrace." Hayes looked at him, nodding slowly. "I understand." Paula stepped back, almost trembling. Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. Gregory looked down, his eyes troubled. First class, once a symbol of power, was now a court of conscience. Lorraine Carter spoke softly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Sometimes, justice doesn't need a court. It just takes one person brave enough to stand up, and others quiet enough to listen. Marcus turned and nodded. "Thank you. But true justice only works when those who are wrong admit it." At that moment, Captain Hayes stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I will report the incident to headquarters. And, to be clear, these 2 young passengers will not move from their seats." Vanessa jumped up. "You have no right." Hayes interrupted. "I have absolute authority over this flight, and I will not allow anyone to violate safety regulations, especially by coercing or insulting passengers." The compartment clapped again, this time loudly and decisively. Marcus stepped back slightly, sitting between his 2 daughters. Ava turned and whispered, "Dad, when you spoke, I felt like everyone was listening." Marcus chuckled. "It's not that I'm loud, honey. It's that when you speak the truth, people feel small." Maya placed her hand on her father's hand, her eyes still filled with tears. "I was scared when she pulled my sister, but then I saw Dad standing up. I knew I didn't need to be scared anymore." Marcus squeezed his son's hand. "That's what I want you to remember. No one can take your dignity away from you unless you give it up." When the plane landed at Boston Logan, no one said anything, but the eyes in the first-class cabin were different. Captain Hayes opened the door first, waiting for the Harrington family to exit first. As soon as he stepped out, Marcus saw a group of airline staff waiting. One of them walked up. It was Stephen Whitaker, CEO of SkyVista. "Mr. Harrington," he said hoarsely, "I just saw the video feed from the passenger. I have nothing but my apologies, and thank you." Marcus looked at him, did not reply, just said slowly, "You do not need to thank me. Thank the two girls for teaching you the value of a ticket and of a person." The story seemed to end there, but as the media got involved, videos from the SkyVista flight spread across the United States, transforming Marcus Harrington from an ordinary father into a symbol of intellectual justice. And then, a federal investigation began. But just before the plane took off from Boston, Captain Robert Hayes decided to do what not many would dare. He asked the entire first-class cabin to remain in place while an internal investigation was conducted on board. "No one moves." His voice was quiet, but loud enough to be heard over the roar of the engine. "We need to get this straight before the doors close." Paula Mitchell stopped in the middle of the aisle, sweat beading on her forehead. Vanessa Albright turned to her husband and whispered in annoyance, "God, he's making a scene." But Hayes paid no attention to anyone's frustration. He placed his clipboard on the table and scanned the passenger list. "Mr. and Mrs. Albright, I need to confirm your ticket information." Gregory, trying to look calm, opened his phone and looked up the reservation code. "We have tickets." It must have been a mistake because the upgrade wasn't updated. Hayes looked up. "Who told you your ticket was upgraded, Ms.?" "Mitchell is here," Gregory replied, his voice now lower. "She said this space was reserved for us by direction from management, specifically from CEO Stephen Whitaker." The captain's eyes turned to Paula. She stood there, frozen. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice not harsh, but heavy. "Is that what you said?" Paula nodded slowly. I was just following the arrangements." "Mr. Whitaker, he told me last week that the Albrights would be given priority if there were seats available. I was just trying to make things easier for everyone." Hayes sighed softly. "But you know, the regulations require confirmation by official email or internal system. Do you have any proof of that verbal instruction?" Paula bowed her head. "No, sir." Marcus leaned in now, his voice soft but clear. So, this whole flight was turned upside down because of a verbal promise, and two kids were insulted because someone believed they had special privileges. No one answered. Captain Hayes put the clipboard down on the chair, his voice firm. "Miss Mitchell, you will be suspended immediately until the Human Resources and Aviation Safety Department completes the investigation. Please leave the cabin and sit in the crew reserve area." Paula turned pale, her eyes red. She opened her mouth to say something, but only managed 2 words. "I'm sorry." Then she walked away quietly, the SkyVista nameplate reflecting the dim yellow light of the cabin like a full stop. Hayes turned to the Albrights. "As for you, I checked with the dispatch center. Your tickets are economy class. There was no confirmed upgrade request, either through the system or from the CEO's office." Vanessa gasped. "No way I spoke to Stephen directly via email." We looked in his mailbox," Hayes interrupted. "There was no letter from Albright." Gregory leaned back in his chair, his face drained of color. He muttered, "Oh my God." Hayes looked straight at them. "I will not let any passenger be degraded just because someone thinks they deserve better." The Albrights. "You have 2 choices. Go back to economy or get off this flight." The air exploded. A few people held their breaths. Lorraine Carter put down her magazine, her eyes shining with quiet conviction. Ava looked at Maya, taking her hand. They said nothing, just held each other tight. Vanessa turned to her husband Gregory. "Say something." Gregory closed his eyes. "Come on, Vanessa. They're right." There was a pause. Then, without looking at anyone, he stood up and took his luggage from the overhead compartment. "Let's go." Vanessa was stunned. "What are you doing?" Gregory did not reply. He only said quietly, as if to himself, "Sometimes leaving is the only way to retain some dignity." They walked down the stairs in silence, under dozens of eyes. No one laughed, no one sarcastically said anything, just a heavy silence, where everyone understood a simple truth: privilege crumbles when the truth comes out. After the cabin door closed, Captain Hayes took to the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, the incident has been resolved. SkyVista Airlines apologizes for any inconvenience. We thank you for your calm and respect during this process. We are now taking off." Applause rang out, not cheers, but a collective sigh of relief at having witnessed justice being done without shouting. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Ava leaned over and whispered, "Dad, is it over?" He smiled, still looking out the window. "No, my dear, it's just beginning. But today, at least, justice has been heard." Maya looked up at her father. "I don't think the captain will be on our side." Marcus shook his head. "Captain Hayes doesn't take anyone's side. He only takes the right side." As the plane lifted off the runway, the Boston afternoon light spilled over the clouds, reflecting off the faces of the three. Below, the world continued to spin, but in that first-class cabin, something had changed forever. Lorraine Carter leaned over and whispered to Marcus, "Mr. Harrington, you may not know it, but that scene when you stood up for your daughter will stay in the minds of old people like me. We used to fight for justice, but we rarely see the next generation do it with such composure." Marcus replied softly, "Thank you. Perhaps we are just continuing what your generation started." She nodded, smiling, her eyes sparkling. "That's the right way. Quiet but unyielding." Captain Hayes left the cockpit for a moment and walked across the cabin. When he passed rows 2A2C, he stopped and removed the gold badge from his chest, the SkyVista logo. "Mr. Marcus, you two girls," he said hoarsely, "on every flight we have a little gift for special passengers. But today, I think you two deserve it more than anyone." He presented Ava and Maya with their junior pilot wings badges. The two girls looked at each other, their eyes shining not from the gift, but from the recognition. "Thank you, Captain," Ava said, bowing slightly. Hayes smiled. "No, thank you, too, for teaching us all a lesson." But when the plane landed, Marcus had no idea that this story would go beyond the scope of a flight. Videos recorded by passengers began to spread online, and within hours, the whole of America was calling it the SkyVista incident. SkyVista 472 touched down on the Boston runway in the slanting afternoon light. The last rays of the sun streamed through the windows, painting the silent faces golden, not the silence of tiredness, but the silence of people who had just witnessed something important. Marcus looked out the window, saw the plane silhouetted against the road, then fading into the light. He took a deep breath, a long, heavy breath, but also a relief. Ava rested her head on her father's shoulder, Maya on the other. During the flight, no one spoke about what had happened. But the moment the wheels touched down, Maya said softly, her voice as small as the wind, "Dad, I thought you were going to be mad." Marcus turned, his smile tired but kind. "I used to want that, but then I remembered. Anger never makes people respect you more." He paused, his eyes looking into the distance. Justice does not need to be shouted. It just needs to be seen. As passengers began to stand, Lorraine Carter, a silver-haired woman in seat 3A, approached and touched Ava's shoulder. "You're so brave," she said, her eyes welling up. "If I were your age, I'm not sure I could have sat still and talked like that." Ava smiled. "I'm scared, but if I keep quiet, they'll think they're right." She nodded. "And you didn't. That's how you grow up." Lorraine squeezed Marcus's hand gently. "You're a good father. I have a son who was a lawyer, but you remind me of my husband. He also believed that how you deal with injustice defines you." Marcus only responded with a grateful look. Sometimes the deepest compliments don't need to be spoken aloud. As the crowd began to leave, Captain Hayes stepped forward, still stern as an old soldier, but with a rare warmth in his eyes. "Mr. Harrington," he said, "thank you for keeping this flight from turning into a war. I've seen men lose control in smaller situations." Marcus shook his hand. "Nobody wins when everyone loses their cool." Hayes nodded, then bent down to the girls. "You two did well. You remind me why we need rules not to keep us out, but to protect us." Ava bowed slightly. "Thank you, Captain." Maya whispered, "I think fairness is something everyone understands. It's just that sometimes they forget." Hayes looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, then laughed. "Maybe you should be a judge, little girl, little." After getting off the plane, they walked through the terminal, through the crowded crowd. Marcus held his two children's hands, feeling the warmth of their small hands. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I should have stood up sooner. I just wanted you to find your strength." Ava turned and smiled, a much calmer smile than her first. "You don't need to apologize. Dad, we know why you're quiet. I've learned that sometimes I don't need anyone to help me. Just knowing I can get up is enough," Maya continued, her voice trembling but firm. "But I also know something else, that if things get out of hand, I still have you. You are our shield." Marcus squeezed their hands. The station lights reflected on his face, a mixture of pride and emotion. "I thought I was teaching you about justice," he said slowly, "but today I realize you were teaching me about patience, about standing firm without getting angry." A group of passengers from the flight passed by. A few stopped to greet Marcus. A young man holding a phone said, "Mr. Harrington, I am a reporter from the Boston Herald. The video from the flight is going viral online. Do you have anything to share?" Marcus shook his head slightly. "No need. Everyone has seen what they need to see. Just remember, sometimes justice begins with someone daring to say no." The reporter nodded and asked no further questions. People sensed that there were stories that did not need interviews. They spoke for themselves through the silence of the characters involved. That evening, when they arrived at the hotel where Mrs. Evelyn Price, Marcus's mother-in-law, was waiting, the two girls hugged her tightly. She smiled and asked, "How was the flight?" Ava looked at Maya, then at her father, and replied, "Longer than usual, but memorable." Evelyn nodded, her deep eyes shining with pride. "I taught your mother," she said slowly, "that you don't always have to fight to win. Sometimes just not letting others make you lose yourself is a victory." Marcus sat down next to his mother-in-law and replied softly, "You're right, as always." She smiled. "No, today, it's thanks to you." Night fell. The room was bathed in a soft yellow light. The two girls slept with their heads next to each other, their faces peaceful. Marcus sat quietly in a chair near the window, looking out at the lit-up Boston city. He closed his eyes, remembering the eyes of Paula Mitchell, Vanessa Albright, Captain Hayes, each with a different expression, but all of them were encapsulated in two words awake. He knew that tomorrow morning, everything would be noisy: newspapers, social media, interviews, and gossip. But right now, in the quiet of his room, he just wanted to remember this moment, his two daughters sleeping peacefully, after a day in which they learned that dignity is not something others give, but something you hold in your heart. Marcus said quietly, "To no one." Perhaps to himself, justice doesn't always come from the courts. It comes from how we treat other people, even when they don't deserve it. Outside the window, lights flickered across the sky. Boston was still bustling, but inside the room, there was only one thing: the peace of knowing you did the right thing: mourning. When Marcus turned on his phone, his inbox was flooded with thousands of messages from families, lawyers, and those who had been silent in the face of injustice. The SkyVista incident was no longer his personal story, but the spark that ignited a change across the entire airline industry. It was also on that day when SkyVista Flight 472 was recorded in its entirety and rebroadcast on television that people began to see long, never-before-seen clips of passengers reacting immediately after the incident, while the plane was still in the air. First class, once a place of silence, became a quiet forum of self-reflection. A man with gray hair, Edward Blake, stood up first. He looked at Marcus, then around, his voice low and husky as if confessing something. "I've been on the other side. 20 years ago, I was a manager for an airline. When there was a complaint, we always took the flight attendant's side by default. The assumption was that customers exaggerate. But today, I saw the opposite." He bowed his head slightly, not in apology to Marcus, but to himself. "Thank you for not shouting. If you had been angry, I probably would never have realized this." Marcus just nodded, saying nothing. His silence made others speak. From the back seat, a middle-aged white woman, her voice trembling, said, "I used to tell my daughter that discrimination is over now, that society is more equal than before. But seeing the two children being treated like this, I realized maybe I just want to believe it is over." She sat down and wiped her eyes. No one said a word of comfort, but everyone in the cabin felt as if something had been lifted from their hearts. A young Asian man, who appeared to be a businessman, stood up and continued, "I was once asked to prove my ticket in first class, even though I fly this route every month. I laughed it off, but now I wish I had said it back. Maybe if someone had said it earlier, what happened today would not have happened." The atmosphere in the cabin gradually changed. The initial frustration gave way to a very different feeling: collective introspection. No one was asked to speak, but one by one, people stood up and recounted an old story that they had buried deep inside. A black man in his 70s, his voice trembling but clear. "I was once kicked out of a restaurant when I was young, just because I sat at the white counter. Back then, I didn't scream. I just stood up and walked out. But today, seeing these two girls stay calm like that, I feel like I'm being given back something." The cabin was dead silent, only the sound of the wind whistling through the plane's fuselage, mingling with the heartbeats of those listening. Captain Robert Hayes stood in front, his hand still on the communications console, but he said nothing. He just watched. His eyes, accustomed to watching the planes overhead, now looked down at the people learning to fly with dignity. After a while, he spoke slowly and firmly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have been flying airplanes for more than 25 years. I have flown hundreds of thousands of passengers all over the world, but today is the first time I have seen a flight actually touch the ground, not at the airport, but in the hearts of people." No one applauded. They just looked at him, and it felt like a ritual. Hayes left his seat and walked over to the Harrington's row. He removed the gold badge from his chest, junior pilot wings, a symbol for children who demonstrate courage and responsibility during flight. He sat down at Ava and Maya's level. "You two," he said, his voice warm and deep. "In our business, there's an unwritten rule when everyone else is lost. The one at the helm has to be the calmest. You did that today, even when the adults couldn't." He held out 2 badges and pinned them to Ava and Maya's collars. "From now on, you two are honorary pilots of SkyVista Airlines." The whole cabin burst into laughter, and a few claps rang out. The atmosphere seemed to thaw. Ava whispered shyly, "I don't fly planes." "Mr. Hayes." Hayes smiled. "You don't need to, because sometimes keeping others from falling is the hardest way to fly." Another passenger, Lorraine Carter, the silver-haired woman who had spoken first, stepped forward. She pulled out an old silver Parker pen from her pocket with the faint inscription 1968, Equal Rights March. She handed it to Marcus. "This pen was in my hand during the 1968 Civil Rights March. I kept it all my life, thinking I would never see another moment like that again. But today, I saw it again on this very plane." Marcus looked at the pen, his hand shaking slightly. "You don't have to." "No," she interrupted, her voice firm. "There are symbols that should not remain in a drawer. They should be passed down so that the next generation will know that justice does not come naturally." Ava looked at her father, then at Lorraine, and said softly, "I will keep it for you until no one else in the world is forced to give up their place." Lorraine laughed, her eyes shining with the faith she had been searching for all her life. As the plane touched down, someone, I don't know who, started clapping. The applause spread from the front row to the back. Not the polite clapping that comes with landing, but clapping for themselves, people who had just seen something right done and promised not to look back at something wrong. Marcus looked around the cabin, then turned to the 2 of them. "See, sometimes it only takes one small action and the world can right itself." Maya nodded, her eyes bright. "I think justice is like this flight. It may waver, it may lose its balance, but it will eventually find its way again." Marcus was silent. Some words needed no editing. He simply smiled, placing his hand on his daughter's head, a gesture that was both protective and accepting that she was more mature than he had thought. When the Harringtons stepped out of the airport, the media was waiting, but Marcus was in no hurry to give interviews. He simply said, "We're not looking for the spotlight. We're looking to shine a light on the dark corners." And that very sentence, that night, became the headline of hundreds of articles across America. 3 days later, the phrase "the SkyVista incident" became a national media phenomenon. Video taken by passenger Edward Blake captured the moment Marcus stood up in the middle of the first-class cabin and said, "Touch my daughter. This will be the last flight you take." Reached more than 30 million views in just 48 hours. Morning television shows, from Good Morning America to the Today Show, replayed the clip with the headline, "Dad Chooses Wisdom Over Anger." No one in the Harrington family said another word, but the whole country knew their names. At the law firm of Harrington and Price Civil Rights, the phones rang constantly. Secretaries had to set up a mailbox just to receive handwritten letters from all over the country from people who had been discriminated against at airports, from black flight attendants, even from white passengers who wanted to apologize for having been silent. One morning, when Natalie, wife of Marcus, a pediatrician at Boston General Hospital, arrived at her husband's office, she stood in front of a desk piled with envelopes. "It looks like a post office in the middle of a war," she said, half joking. Marcus looked up, smiling wearily. "War? Yes. But this time, It doesn't have guns. He pushed a stack of letters toward her, read them. Some letters are not just testimonies, but evidence. Natalie opened an envelope at random. Her voice broke as she read, "I was a flight attendant for 15 years. I was disciplined for not giving white passengers first priority. I kept quiet because I was afraid of losing my job, but when I saw Mr. Harrington stay calm and still protect my son, I cried because he did something I didn't dare do." Natalie folded her arms and looked at her husband. "What do you think?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his eyes deep and tired but clear. "I think this isn't just a case. This is a pattern, and if it's a pattern, then we have to break it legally." That afternoon, Marcus called an internal meeting with two close associates, David Cho, a labor law specialist, and Lisa Moore, a human rights lawyer. He placed his laptop in the middle of the table, displaying dozens of clips, emails, and testimony from witnesses who had worked in the airline industry. Lisa glanced over and frowned slightly. "Are you going to sue SkyVista?" Marcus shook his head. "No. If you just sue SkyVista, they'll fire a few people, apologize publicly, and the story will die. I want to sue the entire system of preferential boarding based on race and status, something that has been implicit in airline policy for decades." David was silent for a few seconds, then nodded, "Class action." Marcus smiled slightly. "Yes, a representative suit, but not just to win, but to force them to rewrite the way they treat people." The room was dead silent. There was only the sound of the ventilation fan and the determined eyes of the three people as if they were signing a wordless declaration. That evening, Marcus and Natalie sat in the kitchen, a yellow light cast on the oak dining table. The twins were fast asleep. Natalie poured him a cup of coffee, her voice gentle. "Are you sure? I know you've won some big cases, but this one will rock the industry." Marcus looked out the window, where his reflection was reflected in the glass. "I'm not sure I'll win, Nat. But I'm sure of one thing, if no one does. People will still be pulled from their seats, even if they bought tickets legally." Natalie gently took her husband's hand, her eyes a mixture of worry and pride. "I'll be with you. We'll fight together, the way you taught your children to fight." 3 weeks later, Harrington and Price filed a formal federal class action lawsuit in Massachusetts District Court against 4 of the largest airlines in the United States. The allegation: systemic discrimination in passenger service and priority policies. The press called it the case that redefined people's right to fair mobility. The story spread across Europe, being reported by the BBC, CNN, and even The Guardian on social media. The hashtag #FlyFair movement emerged. People who had been treated unfairly in airports, train stations, restaurants shared their experiences. A quiet but powerful movement began to take shape. Amid the chaos, Marcus maintained his old routine. In the mornings, he took his 2 children to school. In the evenings, he read them. "To Kill a Mockingbird," Ava asked. "Dad, does justice always prevail?" Marcus smiled, his voice warm but low. "No, girl, it doesn't always win. But every time someone stands up, it takes another step forward." Maya looked at her father. "So this lawsuit is a step." He put his hands on their shoulders. "It's not just a step, it's a path. And maybe someday you'll continue on." One morning in March, when Marcus arrived at court, he found Captain Hayes waiting in the hallway. "I hear the case has begun," Hayes said, smiling innocently. "I don't know the law, but if you need a witness, I'm ready." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Captain. You didn't just fly a plane that day. You brought back the trust of many people." Hayes laughed. "And you reminded the whole country that justice can wear a suit and tie, but not necessarily a wooden gavel." That evening, the national television news opened with the voice of the veteran anchor. A class action lawsuit, the first of its kind in U.S. aviation history, was filed today. The lawsuit is led by attorney Marcus Harrington, a father who defended his twin daughters on a SkyVista flight. Now, he is defending not just his own children, but the rights of millions of others to dignity. When Marcus turned off the TV, he looked out the window. Boston was covered in the first snow of the season. In that quiet moment, he knew the real battle had just begun. But this time, he was not alone. 2 months later, on a chilly January morning, Marcus Harrington and his twin daughters, Ava and Maya, entered the giant glass building of SkyVista headquarters in Chicago. Outside, the wind was blowing so hard that the airline flag was billowing, partially obscuring the new slogan that had been hung the previous week, SkyVista, fly fair, fly equal. The slogan sounded well-intentioned, but Marcus understood the words on the banner meant nothing if the heart of the organization hadn't changed. They were led down a long corridor, the polished marble floor reflecting the white light. The staff in their suits watched them, their eyes a mixture of curiosity and caution. Maya whispered, "It feels like a movie." "Dad." Marcus bent down and smiled slightly. "Yeah, the only difference is that today, we don't play the victim." The conference room door opened. A long walnut table sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by the most senior figures in SkyVista. Stephen Whitaker, the airline's CEO, Sandra Lowell, its chief legal officer, and several members of the executive board. The air in the room was cold and dry, just like its color. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down, his two daughters beside him. Ava looked around. Everyone in the room was older than her father, all white, all wearing shiny watches. She took a deep breath and took her sister's hand. Whitaker began in a friendly tone. "Mr. Harrington, first of all, I want to thank you for coming. And on behalf of SkyVista, I would like to extend my deepest apologies to your family for the unfortunate incident." Marcus just nodded slightly, his gaze unchanged. "You call it a problem. I call it a system that operates based on bias." The room was silent for a few seconds. Marcus's voice was not loud, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Legal Director Lowell interjected, trying to smooth things over. "We looked into the matter, suspended the employee involved," and Marcus interrupted, keeping his voice even. "Ms. Lowell, if it stopped at suspension, I wouldn't be sitting here. We're not talking about a flight attendant. We're talking about a culture that allows people to believe that some people deserve to sit in a chair over others simply because of the color of their skin." The air was thick. Whitaker leaned forward, trying to take control of the meeting. "So what do you expect SkyVista to do?" Marcus looked at his daughters, then back. "I expect nothing. I ask 3 things. He opened the file, each page carefully marked. First, mandatory anti-bias training for all SkyVista employees, from cabin crew, pilots, to management. I contacted the civil rights organization Equity Now to design it together. He paused, turning to the next page. Second, establish an independent complaints mechanism where passengers and employees can report discriminatory behavior without fear of retaliation. And finally, Marcus looked up, his voice dropping. Third, SkyVista needs to review all complaint records from the past 5 years, make the results public, and compensate the victims who have been treated unfairly. The room fell silent. Whitaker looked down at his hands, then back up, his eyes a little tense. "Mr. Harrington, what you're suggesting is huge. In fact, it could damage SkyVista's image," Marcus interrupted, gently but sharply. "Mr. Whitaker, SkyVista's image is damaged, but its honor can still be saved if you dare to face it." Another silence. Then, from the seat beside her, Ava raised her hand slightly. All eyes turned to her. Whitaker smiled politely. "Little girl, do you have something to say?" Ava looked straight at him, her eyes bright but strangely calm. "I just want to ask one question." Whitaker nodded. "Go ahead." Ava tilted her head slightly, her voice clear, each word heavy as if falling to the floor. "Are you sorry because SkyVista was wrong, or because SkyVista was found to be wrong?" The room froze, a question no one was prepared for. Whitaker opened his mouth, but for several seconds nothing came out. He looked around at his advisors, at his secretaries, and finally at Marcus. Marcus did not save him with a smile, just sat there like a silent mirror reflecting the truth. Whitaker took a deep breath. "Thank you, Ava. That question is worth thinking about for an airline like us." The meeting lasted another hour. When Marcus left the room, he said nothing, but in his hand was the signed minutes of the official cooperation agreement. SkyVista accepted all 3 conditions and announced the dismissal of Paula Mitchell and 2 middle managers who had covered up the incident. A new program was immediately launched, the SkyVista Integrity Initiative. For the first time, a major airline invited civil rights organizations and independent lawyers to participate in internal training and audits. On the way out of the headquarters, Ava held Maya's hand and whispered as she walked. "Do you think they really understand?" Marcus looked at the 2 children, his voice soft. "No one understands after just one day. But if they start feeling ashamed today, they can start changing tomorrow." Maya laughed. "So that means you won." Marcus smiled. "No, daughter. We don't win anyone. We just make justice more visible." When they reached the lobby, reporters were already standing. One of them asked loudly, "Mr. Harrington, did SkyVista give in because they were afraid of being sued or because they were truly sorry?" Marcus paused. He didn't answer directly. He looked into the camera, a small smile playing on his lips. Justice doesn't care about reasons. It just needs action. That afternoon, at SkyVista headquarters, Stephen Whitaker sat alone in his 50th floor office. On his desk was a photograph of the Harringtons leaving the building. He stared at it for a long time, then pressed the intercom button. "Please schedule a meeting with HR. I want all new training courses starting next week, mandatory for all levels." "Yeah, sir," replied the secretary. "I will do it right away." Whitaker nodded, his eyes still on the photograph. He probably wouldn't be able to answer Ava's question today, but at least he'd chosen to start there. A year later, SkyVista published its first report on internal equity, and the names of Ava and Maya Harrington appeared in the opening as inspiration for change. But for Marcus, the most valuable thing wasn't that line. It was seeing his daughters stand in public, speaking about justice in the same calm voice he had once spoken. 6 months after the report was released, the summer afternoon in Philadelphia was brighter than usual. The sky was clear, the wind was light, and the Central Plaza in front of Constitution Hall, where America's first Constitution was written, was packed. Thousands gathered, not to protest, not to call, but to listen. They set up a small, modest stage with only a microphone, a few flags, and a wooden board engraved with simple white letters, "Youth Voices for Justice, Young Voices for Justice." In the front row, Marcus and Natalie Harrington sat side by side. He held her hand lightly, his eyes on the stage where his twin daughters were waiting for their turn to speak. Ava stood backstage, taking a deep breath. Maya touched her shoulder, her voice low but firm. "We don't need to be perfect. Just be honest." Ava smiled and nodded. "Just like Dad." The host introduced, "Hello, everyone. Today we have two little girls who have made an airline and a country. Take a look at how they treat others. Please welcome Ava and Maya Harrington." Applause echoed throughout the square. Ava stepped forward, pausing slightly in the crowd. Hundreds of faces turned toward her, but at that moment she saw only one person, her father, smiling, his eyes filled with trust. Ava took the microphone. Her voice trembled a little on the first sentence, but the more she spoke, the more confident she became 6 months ago. "We were just two kids being asked to leave our legally purchased seats. I was scared, but I remembered what my dad said. Justice doesn't need to be shouted, it just needs to be seen." She stopped and glanced at Maya. "Today, we are not here to tell that story. We are here to say we belong everywhere." The whole square fell silent, a deep silence, as if everyone had heard something beyond the words. Maya stepped up next to her and continued. "When people tell us to leave, they think they are protecting VIP rights. But what they don't know is that each of us is a VIP, because we are human beings." She took a deep breath, then spoke slowly and clearly. "If we need to be reminded that we all deserve respect, then we are not really flying. We are just hovering between prejudice and fear." A few people in the crowd bowed their heads. An elderly white woman wiped away tears. A young man held up a handwritten sign. "We belong everywhere." Then a second, a third, within minutes. The entire square was covered with signs that said the same thing, the same sentence, the same belief. After their speeches, Ava and Maya left the stage and hugged their parents. "We just did what it took you 20 years to learn," Marcus said softly, his voice cracking. Ava looked up and smiled. "No, Dad, we just repeated what you taught us." Natalie stood beside him, stroking his hair. "Justice isn't inherited," she said softly, "but courage is." The press immediately reported the news. CNN headlined, "We belong everywhere. Two young girls redefine justice at age 13. On social media, millions of people shared the video of the two sisters' speech. There were no stage effects, no music, just two young, calm voices, and so real that it made people look back at themselves. Schools invited Ava and Maya to speak. Teachers used their speeches as teaching materials about equality and self-respect. Time for Kids magazine put them on its cover with the caption, "Girls Who Don't Bow Their Heads." Marcus, though proud, kept his composure. He knew the public attention would come and go, but he also knew that it was not noise, but a timely voice that changed the world. One evening, after dinner, Marcus sat on the porch, watching his two children laugh and play. He remembered the moment the year before, when the plane stopped in the middle of the runway, when everyone looked at him, the calm black father in the storm of discrimination. At the time, he had no idea that such a silent act would resonate so long. Natalie brought 2 cups of hot tea and set them beside him. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Marcus looked into the darkness and said in a low voice, "I think, maybe for the first time, the world heard its daughter speak and was quiet enough to listen." A few weeks later, the mayor of Philadelphia sent out a formal invitation. The city would like to present Ava and Maya Harrington with the Honorary Freedom Award, recognizing their contributions to raising awareness for social justice. The ceremony was solemn. As Ava received her medal, she turned to Maya and whispered, "I think Evelyn would be proud." Maya smiled. "She is looking at us, somewhere up there." Marcus looked at his 2 children, his eyes no longer those of a fighting lawyer, but of a father who knew he had passed on the most precious thing, not victory, but spirit. That day, before leaving the stage, Ava suddenly turned back to the microphone and added, "If someone tells you that you don't belong somewhere, don't argue. Stay. Because your presence is the answer." The applause was long and loud. People were not just applauding her words. They were applauding the maturity of a generation that dares to speak with reason, not anger. On the night train ride back to Boston, Ava leaned her head against the window, watching the city recede behind her. The fading lights reflected a small smile on her face. "Daddy," Ava asked, "will there ever come a day when people won't need speeches like that anymore?" Marcus was silent for a few seconds, then replied, "Maybe there will be. But until that day comes, the world still needs someone to speak for what is right." Maya turned around, eyes half closed. "Then I will say it until everyone understands." Marcus looked at his two children, his hands clasped lightly, as if holding back the warmth of the future. A year later, on a SkyVista flight to Dallas, the Harrington family was again sitting in rows 2A, 2B, 2C. But this time, the looks around them were not suspicious, only welcoming. And when the captain thanked the family for reminding us of the meaning of equality, Marcus understood the journey to justice did not end in the courtroom, but began with each seat in the sky. That morning, Logan International Airport, Boston was filled with early summer sunshine. The light filtered through the large glass windows, reflecting off the stone floor like gold. Marcus Harrington gently pulled his suitcase, walking beside his wife and twin daughters, Ava and Maya. It had been exactly 2 years since the iconic SkyVista flight, and today they were flying with the same airline, the same route, but in a different world. "Dad, something feels familiar," Maya said as they entered the first-class cabin. Ava smiled. "Seats 2A, 2B, 2C. Last time, I cried. This time, I smiled." Marcus laughed, then bent down to arrange the children's luggage. He said nothing, just looked around. There were no more skeptical looks, no more whispers behind his back. Instead, there were smiles and warm nods from passengers and flight attendants. The head stewardess, a middle-aged, brown-skinned woman, walked over and bowed slightly. "Hello, Mr. Harrington. We are honored to serve your family today." Marcus just nodded slightly, replying in a calm voice, "We are just passengers like everyone else." The flight attendant smiled. "Yes, and that's the best part." As the plane began to taxi, Natalie tilted her head to look at her husband and asked softly, "Are you feeling relieved?" Marcus thought for a moment and then replied, reassured. "No, but calm. Yes." Ava sat in the middle, turned to look at her father. "What is calm, Dad?" Marcus chuckled, his voice reciting an old lesson. "Peace is when you don't have to prove anything anymore, when you know that you belong where you are." Maya leaned her head on her sister's shoulder and said softly, "It's like when people stop asking if you're worthy." Marcus looked at his two children, his eyes filled with pride. Exactly. When you no longer have to prove anything, you've won. The flight went smoothly. On the screen, the new SkyVista logo appeared, "Fly Fair, Fly Together." Below, a slow-motion subtitle read, "Inspired by the Harrington story." Natalie smiled, half teasing, "Maybe they should pay us royalties." Marcus shook his head. "No need. Real change doesn't need a signature, just the right action." An hour later, the captain spoke over the loudspeaker, "Dear customers, today SkyVista celebrates 2 years of our fairness and anti-bias program. We would like to thank all our passengers for their trust and for joining us in making a difference." Applause echoed throughout the cabin. Ava and Maya looked at each other and chuckled. Ava leaned over to Maya. "You're right, Dad. The path to justice isn't just in court." Marcus heard, gently took the two children's hands. his voice low but warm. Justice is not a place. It is a habit of the way we look at each other. When the plane landed in Dallas, a middle-aged white woman approached Marcus. "Mr. Harrington?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus was a little surprised. "Yes, it's me." She held out an envelope. "I apologize for disturbing you, but I must say, a year ago, I was the chief stewardess of another airline. I witnessed a situation exactly like yours on your flight, and I said nothing. But after hearing your story and your daughter's, I decided not to keep quiet. I reported it, and the woman who was discriminated against received a public apology." Her voice choked up. "Thank you. Because of you, I learned that sometimes just one person standing up can change everything." Marcus smiled gently, said nothing, just placed his hand on the envelope and nodded. When she left, Ava asked, "Dad, what is it I don't know?" Marcus replied, his eyes distant, "But I think it's a testimony." That evening, at his hotel in Dallas, Marcus sat down to write a few lines in his worn leather notebook, the one he had started on the first day of the trial. On a new page, he wrote, "Knowing when to stand alone is strength. Knowing when to stand together is wisdom. Knowing both can change the world." He paused and smiled. Behind him, Ava and Maya were watching a video of the Philadelphia speech with their mother. The three of them laughed at the sound of Ava's shaky voice on the first line. Marcus gently closed the book, leaned back, and let out a sigh of relief. It was not pride, but the serenity of someone who had found his true place in this world. The next morning, as the Harringtons prepared to return to Boston, a SkyVista ticket counter employee handed Marcus a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Stephen Whitaker, CEO of SkyVista. "Marcus, I've learned that apologizing is just the first step. Making amends is the next step. Thank you for forcing us to be better. Stephen." Marcus finished reading it and said nothing. He just folded it up and put it in his pocket. Then he turned to his two children. "Are you ready?" Ava nodded. Maya took her father's hand. "This time, we fly again, but with faith." As the plane took off, sunlight streamed through the windows. Below, white clouds rolled like cotton carpets. Ava leaned her head on her father's shoulder and whispered, "Dad, this is what I think justice looks like." Marcus asked. "Like what?" "Like the sky big, calm, and everyone has a place." Marcus nodded, his eyes closing. In that silence, he knew old wounds were no longer scars, but witnesses to a journey completed with forgiveness and wisdom. From the sky, justice is no longer a concept. It is how people learn to stand up, learn to stand together, and learn not to have to stand up again. The story of lawyer Marcus Harrington and his twin daughters Ava and Maya is not only a lesson in justice, but also a mirror for each of us on how to react when offended. In a moment when anger could have exploded, Marcus chose wisdom over hatred, and it was that calmness that caused the whole system to change. The story reminds us that justice doesn't need to be shouted to be heard, but sometimes it comes from perseverance, from how we maintain our dignity in the midst of injustice. Ava and Maya, two young girls, demonstrate that courage is not about confrontation, but about standing firm and saying what is right, even when the world is silent. In life, we all have times when we are looked down upon, misjudged, or forced to leave the seat we deserve. But if we are calm enough not to leave ourselves, that is the real victory. Remember, knowing when to stand alone is strength. Knowing when to stand together is wisdom. Knowing both, we can change the world. Thank you for following this story, a journey of self-respect, wisdom, and justice. If you believe that how we treat each other is the measure of human dignity, please like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to help us spread stories that touch the heart, where kindness always wins.